So welcome to this Female Disruptor session on the She Means Business track. This session is What's Her Story? Create Your Brand Story with Andrea Sock. I am your moderator, Rachel Heseltine, VP of Consumer Growth at Trader Interactive. Andrea is the founder and CEO of Sock Influencer PR. She started her boutique firm after a lengthy career in marketing and communications in order to combine her passions for storytelling, PR, and influencer marketing. Practicing her unique influencer PR approach, Andrea works with small businesses, startups, and nonprofits, and is always in search of story gems she can share with the world. Please feel free to drop any questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll get Andrea to answer as many of them as possible in the time that we have. So now, over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to speak to you about my favorite topic, storytelling. I am going to share a deck, so let me just share a screen. I would love for folks to, like Rachel said, if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And I'd love to know where you're from too. So if you want to drop that in the chat, just let us know where you're from so we know who we're talking to. Rachel, you can see my screen? Yes? Awesome. Yep. Great. So let's get started. All right. So thank you for the introduction. This is a little bit more about me. I've been telling stories for as long as I can remember. I used to walk around with my notebook as a kid and I would interview people, and I just find stories so fascinating. I think that everyone has an amazing story to tell. And if that's the only thing that you take away from today, that you have an amazing story and you should be telling it, then I am here for that. I've worked in journalism. I've worked with a lot of nonprofits, traveling around the world, honestly, walking in and meeting people and interviewing, moms that have walked for miles to get access to healthcare for their children. I've interviewed service members, finding out what their passions are and why they serve, and volunteers. So I love telling stories. And I really combine those two things to launch my business, Sock Influencer PR. And we're going to go over really how can you kickstart your storytelling. So what can storytelling do for you? I think you probably already know, that's why you're here. But really leverage your stories to fuel your marketing efforts, your content for your posts, your presentations, your interviews. It also helps build trust because you're making connections with people. I think that's what's so great about storytelling, is that we're making those connections. And you're developing brand loyalty and sometimes increasing that brand loyalty. So today we're going to go over 5 steps to kickstart this process. We're going to look at keywords. We're going to look at our audience, our tone, who is the hero or heroines of our story, and we're going to start developing that elevator pitch. So we start with keywords. And the reason I like to start with keywords is a lot of times when I work with founders, they come to me with this, these lengthy stories, which are great, all the steps that built up to launching their business or their brand. And sometimes it can be overwhelming. You want to get all these ideas on paper, and it turns into this autobiography that's so long that honestly, if you were meeting somebody for the first time, it would be too long to tell them. So I really like to start with, what are those keywords? Let's look at words and phrases that you like in association with you or your brand. And it doesn't need to be difficult. It can literally be a whiteboard brainstorm. Use a Google Doc, get a pen and paper, spend 20 minutes. If you invest 20 minutes on really looking at the words, that's a document that you're going to go back to as you build your story, because you're going to remember, I like that word. I like how I said that. A lot of times I'll listen to recordings when my clients do interviews, and I will take quotes from those interviews because they say things and they don't realize how brilliant they are. And so we take those phrases and we'll go back and we'll reuse them in marketing materials and future interviews. So looking at what are the words and phrases that you like. And then also on the opposite side of that, what are the words and phrases you don't like? And maybe those are phrases that your competitors use, folks that you see in the space that you want to differentiate yourself from, and write those down. They could also have, negative connotations or sending people down the wrong path. So have a column for words and phrases that you like, and that's probably going to be lengthy. And then have a group of words and phrases that you don't like or you don't want to see in association with your story or your brand story. Second step, we're going to really look at the audience. And I'm going to introduce you to, this is Melissa Pankos. She is the founder and CEO of The Beans. She's one of my clients. She is a brilliant female founder. Her fintech startup, The Beans, is simplifying the path to financial balance, helping folks to reduce stress. And her audience are what we call the caring class. Those are your teachers, your healthcare workers, nonprofit workers, social workers, folks who are choosing careers of mission over money. And we're really helping them to experience less financial stress, knowing that they're getting paid a lot less than their peers in the industry. So Melissa, she has a lot of different audiences, right? So she's talking to her customers, her consumers, who are these teachers and healthcare workers. She's also a fintech startup, so you're always in fundraising mode. So she's talking to her investors and her funders. And then she has the whole approach to The Beans is it's research-based, it's science-backed. So there's this whole research science community that she's talking to. So depending on where she is, we're talking to a lot of different audiences. And so how do you connect with that audience? And really what we try to do is we bring it back to her background. She started as a teacher. She worked as a Teach for America teacher early in her career, and she knows what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck on a teacher's salary. And so every time we talk, every time we do a talk, she starts right there. So she's developing that connection to her consumer, to her audience, right from the very beginning, saying to folks, I know I've been there. I was a teacher. Secondly, she went to the University of Oxford and worked as a researcher. And she has this science background. She developed this program called Economic Strengthening that's being deployed around the world to millions of people through the UN and WHO. So she has that science background. So she's creating that connection to her audience right then and there, again, differentiating herself from her competitors because they use science. And then she also worked at a venture capital firm. So she knows the fintech world, she knows the startup world. And so depending on the audience, we're leaning in to those different areas. Now you may be thinking, maybe many of you are probably on maybe a second career, you're entering a field that you haven't, had a lot of experience in. So you're thinking, how am I going to make these connections? There's always a connection because you're driven to do what you do for some reason. We just need to uncover what that reason is, and we need to put it in the forefront so you can develop that connection to your audience. Maybe you volunteer in an area, maybe you've sat on a board, maybe you know somebody that's experienced this problem in your life. Who are your customers? Who are you talking to? Let's build those connections and make sure you're putting that connection at the forefront of telling your story. So the third item is to take a tone. And this is funny. I say take a tone because folks will put out a tone without really realizing that they're putting out a tone. And then it's hard to kind of walk that back. So be intentional and think about what your tone is. And I put some words on here. It could be multiple things. You could have a professional with a fun twist. You could be serious, but also be approachable. What is your tone and how do you want your audience to perceive you? How do you want your customers to perceive you? How do you want your brand to be perceived? Really think about that tone because that's going to help frame your story and that's going to help how you tell your story. And then when you bring in folks like myself or our firm and we're writing copy for you, we're writing, speeches for you, that's important. We look for those information because I don't want to put you out there and you're like, oh, that's, I would never.
Andrea, we've lost your voice.
Hello? No?
Now you're back.
Okay. Sorry. I don't know what happened. We really want people to understand and receive you the way that you want to be received. So that's really the most important part about tone. So who is your hero or heroine? This is your fourth step. Obviously, the story is about you or your business, but there are heroes and heroines throughout your life. They're your mentors. Maybe they're your parents. Maybe there's somebody who had, brought you to this issue that you're currently working on. So we want to give them props. We want to highlight them. We want to make sure that it's really helping to tell your story, how you built to get to where you are. We go back to the example of Melissa Pankos and the Beans. Her heroes are really those teachers and those frontline workers who are doing, the backbone of America's economy day in and day out. and really struggling financially. She is here for them. She gives them props every time we speak. And that really, again, endears her to our audience. It makes that connection. And we want to learn more. So share with us who are your heroes and heroines as you speak and as you develop that story. And it could be multiple people, but really think about who is that, or who are those folks in your story. So finally, you have all these pieces, and I've been talking forever, and we can do some questions, but you have all these pieces. Now, how do you put it together? I like to say, really focus on first starting it with your elevator pitch. Now, your story can obviously be longer, but getting your elevator pitch down is almost the hardest part. When you do, let's say you're sitting on a panel, or you're doing introducing a conversation, or even when I set my clients up for media interviews, honestly, the hardest question is, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. And folks really struggle. They struggle to get something that they know so intimately out into the world. So I really ask folks to focus on their elevator pitch. And that's the 2 to 3 sentences that if you're meeting somebody for the first time, that says who you are and what you're about. And you're using all those pieces that we did, all those 4 steps up to this point, to build your elevator pitch. So you're looking at your keywords. You're looking at maybe who's your hero, your heroine. You're definitely looking at your tone. And you're succinctly saying who you are and what you're about in a fashion that people can easily receive. And you can say it over and over again. And then I say a bonus element is have a customer story in your pocket. So especially for our female founders, one, they don't like to talk about themselves. So this is really difficult. I don't know what it is about women, but we hate to talk about ourselves. Oh, I want to talk about the company. I don't want to talk about myself. Your story is interesting. Practice this part, but also you can have that customer story in your pocket, and it makes you a little bit more comfortable. It allows people, again, to develop that connection. And that could be a customer success story. That could be a customer that you've been with for a long time. If you're a service-based business, maybe you help them grow. If you're promoting your personal brand, is it somebody that you had a connection with? How do you tell your story outside of yourself? And if you have that story in your pocket and you practice that story, it will make you feel more comfortable. And having that customer story in your pocket, you can use the same customer story over and over again. And that's a question that I get from folks a lot of times is, well, I need to have multiple stories. You don't need to have multiple stories because you're talking to different people all the time. Have that customer story in your back pocket, practice it, practice your elevator pitch, sit down with a customer, sit down with a friend, and introduce yourself. And that's the easiest way to practice your elevator pitch. And you will be surprised how hard it is, but you will also be pleasantly surprised how helpful that is, so that once you practice that elevator pitch, you'll feel more confident. You can deliver that and then build out your longer story. And you can have multiple versions of your story. That story can be paragraphs and paragraphs long, but getting that elevator pitch is really what's key. And then finally, I know that we probably have folks that are, again, career changers or starting a business later in life. And maybe what you did in the first half of your life is different than what you're doing now. This is a quote from Dr. Jodi Carrington, who's a psychologist and author that I've worked with, and she's amazing. And she's basically telling us, yes, your story can change. And I'm giving you a big, giant yes. Your story can change. It can evolve. What you did today, what you're doing today can be different than what you did 20 years ago. And you can weave that together. So there are ways definitely to weave that together. Everything built on what you've done to bring you to where you are today. And then that's it. I have time for questions. If folks have any questions or want me to elaborate on anything, I can stop sharing too. So.
Well, while we wait for folks to put stuff into the chat, I'm just going to say, while you might think that the elevator pitch is an abstract concept, I have actually had an escalator pitch where I was interviewed from the base of a large escalator right the way to the top. So you definitely, it's good to practice.
You gotta have it down.
Have that ready. Absolutely, absolutely. So one question I'm going to throw out there while other folks are thinking of theirs, keywords. So obviously the first thing you talked about, and you talked about, what is good for you, what resonates with you, the ones you don't want to use based on your competition. I'm coming from an SEO background. Mm-hmm. So how much research should you be doing into those keywords as well? Are there tools that you should be using to look to see how well those keywords, can help you be found?
Right. That's a great question. I would say the first step, don't think about any external factors. It's you and that piece of paper, pen, computer, whatever that is, putting them all down, capture them all as much as you can. And it can be a lot because that's what you're drawn to. That's what you're most passionate about. But then, yes, I'd say as you develop your pitch, as you develop your marketing materials, you're putting more thought and research behind it. And I will caution, again, our founders, I don't know if it's founder syndrome or what, founders are often tied to certain words because of their background. So if I go back to Melissa Pankos and the Beans, she's a researcher. She's using phrases and terms that the average American, they don't know what that means. That's not in their vocabulary. And so it's a constant dialogue where we're balancing the terms and phrases that she's familiar with and then what our audience is familiar with. And so you might need to do some testing there, just because you're, married to a phrase or to a set of words that may not translate for your audience. So my first step would be get them all on paper, but then let's do some testing. Let's do some research to see what folks are what's resonating. Yeah. And then I will say industry terms change too. I work with a client who is in the green business. And, I'm always learning from her because I'm not really familiar with the green industry. But she'll tell me, we're not using this term anymore. We're now using decarbonization. She's like, it means the same thing, but this is the trend. And so, we change up the terms based on what the industry is driving as well. But that's a great question.
Sure. And it doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in yet. So, one of the topics that I've talked on in the past has been about reputation management. So how would somebody go about correcting their brand if they've had some kind of, let's call it a slip? Right.
So I go back to the foundations, the keywords, the tone, a lot of it can be the tone. And then I would say that also the audience is really key there. Your audience may or may not have changed as you are kind of stepping out of a crisis mode or walking away from a crisis situation. But really sitting down with the customer, and you'd be surprised at how infrequently people do this, especially the longer they've been in business. And the customer is really your doorway to success. So sitting down with a loyal customer or even a new customer, it could be informal, it could be more formal, like a survey. But hearing from them what they're seeing in the world, their perception of you and your business, and that can really fuel that kind of refresh that you need. And then you're building that loyalty with them. And then hopefully you're building also kind of an army behind you that can help propel you with that new look, new feel, refreshed image that you're trying to, escape a crisis and come in with fervor. You need folks behind you that can rally and support you. And if you're endearing yourselves to your customers, they can be those folks for you. Or it could be friends or peers in the industry could also be really powerful. But having a conversation and really stepping back from yourself and hearing what they have to say, because sometimes it's hard for us we're so narrow focused because we're living it day to day. It's so hard for us to focus and see what's going on and how people are receiving us in the business. But having that conversation with those that are closest to you can really help drive that.
Yeah. Yeah. And personal branding is such an important thing to do as well. And you can always come back from a crisis.
Oh yeah. It'll take time. I know folks are, if they have several bad reviews or they have a larger crisis, it may take time. But bringing those folks who are your closest champions closer and helping them to help you and receiving that help can really be the key there.
Okay, great. And since we still haven't had a question pop through, I'm going to ask you, what is your bonus customer story?
Oh, my bonus. Well, I do use Melissa a lot because Melissa Pankos from the Beans, she's doing amazing work and I completely admire her and her story and how she's transformed the customer. I would say another one that I that I go back to quite frequently, a mom and pop startup hair care business called Naturally Perry. They were a client of mine for quite some time. And they developed their hair care business because they developed it for millennials, because the co-founder is a millennial. And then after our work together, we had one local placement in their hometown paper, and it completely shut down their website. They sold out of their product, and they uncovered that women age 50 plus really wanted their product. And so we opened them up to a new consumer demographic. So that was a huge win for us. And I just really love them.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, everybody forgets about us Gen Xers. So
yes, it was great.
All right. Well, I think unless there's anything else you would like to, we have a Q&A. We have something come up. Great. So local search and branding, including small business, versus nationwide or international search and branding. So I guess that's more about where should you place that focus? Should you be looking at more of that local type of promotion about yourself, or should it be just the general getting yourself out everywhere?
Yeah. So I think also folks struggle with this as they're building their business. I can't tell you how many people come to me and say, well, I just need to be on national press, or I just need to be here, and again, national. And that Naturally Perry example is an example of success locally. I would say start with where your customers are. Yes, you want to grow your business. That may be a couple of years down the road. And you can get a lot of wins by looking in your own backyard. So I would start with where you are at and where your base is, and then open it up to national or international, depending on what your business is. I don't think you need to start, you start trying to, what's the phrase, eat an elephant, like it's just going to be too much. You need to really start where you are, do what's manageable, do what you can maintain, and build. So take that to the next step. So I always start local, and I encourage people to don't lose sight of that local voice that can help amplify your story, because they often have more influence over your audience than a random person who may have more reach.
Yeah. And obviously for all this as well, I mean, it's what you're doing for your business, but it's also your personal brand. So you really want to have two elevator pitches, one for your business and one for you. Because
and how you connect to and the motivation for starting. And I think you hit the nail on the head. That's where a lot of folks struggle, is they just want to put the brand out there and they don't want to tell their personal story. And again, I don't know, I'm sure there's some science behind why female founders tend to do this more than male founders, but it's so important. And your story is so important, and people want to connect with you. There's so much research out there that shares, our consumers are more savvy. They're doing more research. They want to know what the brand stands for. They want to know who's behind it, what are their values. And you are really the face of that, and own it. Own your story, own your brand story.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's probably about it. We're close to the end of the half hour. Awesome. So I'd like to thank you so much, and apologies for not saying your name right at the beginning.
Bye.
But thank you everybody for attending, and we will be, hang on, there is one quick one popped up. Do you recommend a brand mark for yourself as well as for your product?
I didn't, for yourself as well as your product.
Yeah.
I think it depends on it depends. and depends how many other things you're involved in. I think as you start out, founders are so intimately tied to their brand, and really your story elevates your brand. And I think you should really keep that connection. But as you grow and as you're into multiple avenues or maybe multiple verticals, that can change. But I encourage folks to really stick with it and keep them connected to begin with. And I will say, I didn't share my last couple slides, but 3 takeaways I'd love for folks. Really be human. Think about your stories, really being human. Keep it simple. Again, when folks start this process, they have volumes to share, a lifetime of growth to share, which is great, but when you're developing that elevator pitch, keep it simple, because you need to be able to repeat that and repeat it quickly and really get it down. And then be authentic. Don't try to be something that you're not. And that authenticity will allow others to share your story more frequently, and really just build your brand and build your personal story. And then my last slide was thank you. And I'd love for folks to connect with me. And we do offer a free storytelling session if you are having challenges kind of getting there, or maybe again a transition in careers or industries. I'd love to spend some time with you and kind of dive into that and what that could look like.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much. And that is the end of this session. So I hope everybody has enjoyed it, and thank you so much.